Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told out of Voice of Radio. So today, we're back with new Sparkling Pokémon. We knew the Battle Region was going to have Sparkling Pokémon in. We knew that there were more, well, actually, we didn't know there were more coming, that's a lie. We hoped that there were more coming, and we now have Sparkling Heatran. Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. I kind of hoped there were going to be more Sparkling Pokemon. I hoped there were going to be more than just Sparkling Heatran. Turns out there isn't more than just Sparkling Heatran. We've just got Sparkling Heatran, which is, I'm going to be honest with you, slightly disappointing. It's not the end of the world, but I do think it's fair to say slightly disappointing. So we should at least have a look to see if it's any good, right? Translations, of course, from the lovely Antoine Boulet. And what we've got here is a basic Pokemon. They're all basic. 160 HP. It's actually alright. It takes it out of the range on the bench of stuff like Rapid Strike Urshifu. So as much as it's not great, not arguing that it's great, it's not bad. It's not bad, ladies and gentlemen. And then we got a retreat cost of 3, which is actually kind of high and annoying, so cheers for that. And a weakness to water, which is, I don't know. I mean, is anyone actually attacking with Inteleon? Because if they are, not ideal. If they're not, nah, you'll be alright, ladies and gentlemen. It's not a worst weakness ever right now. They tend to be more supporting Pokemon. So what we've got here is Fire Pokemon, which is actually quite nice. You're hitting weakness on Metal Pokemon like Genesect, and Grass Pokemon like Leafeon, which still sees a bit of play here and there. And it gives us access to stuff like Magma Basin, which will accelerate an energy while putting damage counters on it, which is actually super relevant here, because what this does for 1 fire and 2 colorless energy is 70 damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon. 70 damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon. This adds up ridiculously quickly. Like, stupidly quickly. Because if you use Magma Basin to put the energy on there, you place 2 damage counters, you're doing 140 damage. That's crazy. Like, really crazy. Essentially, when this hits the field, your opponent has to one-hit KO it as fast as they can. Now, the good news is most of the good ways of self-damaging are actually stadiums. So along with Magma Basin, we've got Old Cemetery. When you attach an energy to yourself, you take 2 damage counters, unless you're a psychic Pokemon, which this isn't. And I love the idea of using Magma Basin, then using Old Cemetery to attach a double turbo energy, which will then put 4 damage counters on. You'll do 280, but double turbo will bring it down to 260. But 260 is still KOing Pokemon V-Star, so that sounds fine to me. The problem is, you can do that, but you can only do that if Magma Basin was on the field when you started your turn. Then you use Magma Basin and then replace it with Old Cemetery and then use that. You can't play more than 1 stadium per turn. You can't just keep swapping them out. So that's kind of annoying. The other one we've got here is Spikemuth, and I do like this with Spikemuth. The problem is, Spikemuth I should mention, and it will rotate 3 months after this comes out, but we still got that 3-month period. Spikemuth, when a player's active Pokemon moves to the bench, put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. So there is absolutely ways that you can be switching in and out, using Spikemuth a couple of times during your turn, and getting kind of 6, 8 damage counters on and going absolutely nuts. The problem is you kind of need Magma Basin to accelerate the fire energy in the first place. Yeah. That's the problem I keep running into with this. I keep wanting to use too many stadiums in one go, and it doesn't work. Now, there is obviously the possibility that your opponent somehow just lets you use Magma Basin 3 turns in a row, and you just get free fire energy on there and 6 damage counters, and then you do 420 damage, which would be ridiculous. But I don't think that's going to happen very often. I think your opponent is going to stop you. This is a kind of attack that so many people who are newer players or less experienced players are going to wonder why it never works. Because what's going to happen is they're going to play it and their opponent's going to go, oh, boss's orders KO. And they're never going to get the big attack off. This is a kind of Pokemon that, if used correctly, you can legitimately trade one for free. You use a single prize Pokemon to take 3 prizes. It can do that, but you've got to do it properly, and you've got to plan it, and if you just drop it down on the bench and try loading it up, your opponent is going to gust and KO. Now, of course, there is a pretty strong argument that, well, that might actually be good. Because, like, if you've got a big Pokemon in the active that's swinging for big damage and you put a bunch of energy on there, you might want to keep it in the active, swinging for big damage. So the theory essentially is that you bench this Heatran, hoping that your opponent goes after this and ignores your active. You basically put your opponent in a position where they either leave a big active Pokemon with lots of energy swinging for lots of damage, or they leave your Heatran on the bench for a turn or two, giving you time to power it up, putting your opponent in an impossible position. That's how you want to do this. There are basically 2 ways Heatran becomes good. You either drop it, get it rolling and attack right now, or you have something in the active that your opponent has to take out, forcing them to ignore Heatran, and then you go from there. That is your other option. And it is one of those 2 things. If used correctly, this is phenomenal. Fire double colorless is not that hard to pay. If we still had Welder, the combination of Welder and Magma Basin would be amazing. Or even just Welder and Spikemuth with an attachment for the turn or something along those lines. But we don't. In Expanded, where we do have Welder, play this in every fire deck. Like, just play it in every fire deck. It's a 1-card thing. And worst case scenario, your opponent 1-hits it and ignores your active Pokemon. It only gives up 1 prize. So don't even worry about it. In Standard, you've got to work for it, but I do think we can make it work. If you get 5 damage counters on there, then you're hitting 350. Even with a double turbo, you're down to 330. And that will KO basically any relevant VMAX. There'll be 1 or 2 you miss, but honestly, like I've said, Choice Bout will plug any gaps that you've got. And I do think Magma Base and Double Turbo is probably the way to go here, at least in terms of a surprise attack. 2 damage counters, you'll be hitting 140, comes down to 120. 120 for basically 1 energy attachment on a basic Pokemon. That ain't bad, ladies and gentlemen. You can pop it up to 150 with Choice Belt, and it's fine. Otherwise, you've got to try and leave it down for a turn. If you can get 2 turns of Magma Basin with this, you just need to attach for your turn, and you've got 4 damage counters on there, and now all of a sudden you're hitting 280. That is kind of nuts. 310 with a Choice Bout, but honestly, 280 is enough to get any Pokemon V-Star we've seen so far, and this can be great. Do remember Cape of Toughness becomes a really nice option, but it will be rotating about 3 months after it comes out. It gives the basic Pokemon an extra 50 HP, so now you're up to 210, and that can be even better. I don't think this is a perfect card that is super easy to use, but I don't think it's supposed to be. The whole point here is that you've got a phenomenal single card tech that is going to take a little bit of work to get going, but it's totally going to be worth it when you do. Now remember that you're only allowed 1 of any type of Sparkling Pokemon in your deck. That is really important. So if you're playing this, you cannot use either Greninja or Hawlucha. So essentially a choice needs to be made here. Sparkling Greninja has got the ability that lets you discard an energy from your hand and draw 2 cards, which is phenomenal. And then for free energy, you do 90 to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon, discarding 2 of them. I love that, especially for the drawing ability. And I do think Greninja is going to be a go-to Sparkling Pokemon for a bunch of people, just for that ability. We've then got Sparkling Hawlucha, which sits on the bench and lets all of your Pokemon do 30 more to Pokemon VMAX, which I like. That's going to get less and less good over time as VMAXs get less and less relevant, but I do quite like that for hitting key numbers, but I do think that is a very situational, occasional use, whereas Greninja is going to be your go-to. And Heatran ain't going to be a go-to, let's be clear. Heatran is a very specific tech, pretty much for decks that are using Magma Basin. But in any decks that are using Magma Basin, you have got to give this a go. And it's not always going to work. There are going to be a bunch of games where your opponent foils you before you get going, and that is a risk that you take. But it is one card in your deck, and when you're trading this for a 2 free prize Pokemon, and bearing in mind you only need 3 or 4 damage counters a lot of the time to get a big KO, so your opponent is going to have to KO it, or you're going to start running through their entire deck. If nothing else, it is a phenomenal decoy that you can literally just bench with no intention of using it. As long as you've got stuff like Magma Basin and you can use it, just drop it even though you never intend to use it to force your opponent into an awkward position. Either they leave it and you actually do use it, or they take it out and your active survives an extra turn. It's a great decoy if nothing else. I love this. I'm giving it 4 Wassies. I think it's a bit awkward to use, but I do think it's great, and I think a bunch of decks are going to play this. But I want to know what you think. So let me know in the comment section, would you? Go nuts! Be nice! And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCG Radio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.